OctoPi, the Raspberry Pi image you can use to install Octoprint, has a new camera stack, and we're going to check it out. What's up everyone, Chris here. OctoPi and Octoprint are always evolving. They're always adding new features, and it does get more efficient. And when we do videos like this, it's always important to note what the difference between OctoPi and Octoprint is. Octoprint is an awesome piece of software that's written in Python that will help you control your 3D printer. OctoPi is an OS image that's designed to run on a Raspberry Pi that contains Octoprint. It's just an easier way to install it. But having said that, Octoprint utilizes some applications and parts of the OS to do some of the things that it does. The thing we're focused on here is using a camera. That camera feed is actually backed by another application that runs on the OS that allows you to see that camera feed. And the way that the new stack does it is just a bit different, and it's a lot more efficient. It's also much easier to implement multiple cameras. And I'm pretty sure the last time we did one of these videos where we installed multiple cameras or multiple instances, I said that that was going to be the last one. Today we're going to run through the Octoprint multi-instance install one last time. And I should know better by now than to say anything's going to be the last time, because things get better and we might want to take a look at them down the road. So that's what we're going to do today. We have a new OctoPi image with a new camera stack. We're going to get it installed. I'm going to show you how to do multiple cameras because they've added all kinds of different things we can utilize to get that done now. And it all runs more efficiently because of this new stack. And it's probably going to be the go forward method to implement Octoprint and OctoPi, so we might as well get used to it and see how it all works. So let's get started by taking a look at the hardware. We'll do a quick overview, then we'll move into installing some cameras. So here's everything we're going to use to implement this project today. I'm using just a regular old Raspberry Pi 3B that I had setting around. You can use a 3, a 4, a 0, a 02. The original 0 is not recommended. It does work, but your mileage may vary. SD card, I'm using a SanDisk 16 gig. It's an A1 number 10. You can use pretty much any SD card as well, but your performance will vary. So I like to use at least an A1 number 10 to ensure that it moves along pretty quickly. Now, your power supply, that's always important with any Raspberry Pi project. For a 3 Raspberry Pi, you want somewhere around 2 amps. For a 4, you want 3 amps. Try to get a quality power supply, because this is going to cause you a lot of problems if you don't have enough juice. It's going to throw errors, it's going to throttle the CPU, all kinds of bad stuff. And then for cameras, I'm just going to use 2. I have the C920 Logitechs just sitting around doing nothing. These are the cams we're going to install, so I can show you how to do multiple cams on the new stack. So let's get to the computer. So we've got our SD card loaded on the computer. I've done these installs for Octoprint many times. It's pretty straightforward. I will leave a video link in the description so you can get set up quickly, but it hasn't changed that much. We're going to choose our OS. If you're using the Raspberry Pi config tool, it's going to have the latest versions that you need. We're going to do other specific purpose OS, 3D printing, and then OctoPi. OctoPi, you can see we have a stable, and then we've got one with the new camera stack. I'm sure the stable is going to go with the new camera stack version, but for today's video, we're going to select this one. Choose your storage. There's my SD card, and then down here, you can choose the settings that you would like to be set when it installs. Again, this will be in the other video, but we're just going to call this one test_cam. We'll punch in our Wi-Fi info, our username and password, so that it's already ready to go when the install comes up. So we'll save, and we'll write it to the SD card. The image is complete. That's the nice thing about the Raspberry Pi image. You don't have to do anything else. It was all contained in that settings file. So we'll just hit continue. We'll take our SD card out of the computer, load it on a Raspberry Pi, and then we can power up. We'll leave the cameras unplugged for now so I can show you a few things before we add those in. And before we get started, Gina has put all the information on the new camera stack out there. There's some great articles. I'll leave these in the description, but read through that. As well as there's a community guide that she's trying to give you some specifics on adding multiple cameras and how to control them. So there's a lot of great information out there other than what I'm getting ready to tell you today. So check that out. So here's our brand new OctoPi image running Octoprint on a Raspberry Pi. We'll just run through the wizard really quickly. You've seen all this before, I'm sure. It's very straightforward, self-explanatory. You will notice in the wizard there is a classic webcam wizard. Some of this from the classic style webcam is still available. Setting the URL, setting the snapshot URL, you can change that up here, but remember it has to be accessible from your browser. We're going to leave it default so I can show you what all this does, but just note it's in the setup wizard now if you need it. We're all done. Now we can start using Octoprint. So as far as the camera is concerned, on the surface here, everything is the same. If we go to control, we don't have a webcam plugged in. It's going to try to start it. You'll notice that it gives you some settings there. It can't get to that current stream. That's expected. We're going to open up a PuTTY session and get in SSH so I can show you how some of this stuff works and how we can use multiple cameras. Remember, your username and password is whatever you set it up to be when you created the SD card from the image. So before in Octoprint, how you configured these was through some configuration files. You could create multiples for multiple cameras and adjust the settings. It's not that much different, but it does handle it a certain way. So the first thing I want you to notice is where these configuration files are stored. So just do an ls on /boot /camera streamer -streamer. And you'll notice we have a live cam config and a USB default config. From there, if we take a look at that USB default config, we'll just do a cat. I'm in the home directory, so I'm doing these fully qualified, but cat boot camera streamer USB default.conf. There's not a whole lot in here, but you can add whatever you want to configure your cameras. This is the default camera, and it's important to note it's on port 8080. 8080, whatever camera you have, that's always going to be the only one that shows in the camera tab. So if you only have one camera, we're going to plug it in, it's going to use 8080. And that is the only one that you will see right here. So now that we know that, where the default configurations are, we're going to go ahead and plug in our first C920. After just a few seconds, you can go back to your Octoprint browser into the control tab, and you can see the camera is available. There's our purple dice. And you can check on this camera with the systemctl utility, system control. So let's just do sudo systemctl, and we'll do status camera-streamer. You can see the status. The camera streamer came up, it's running, it does some work, and our stream is up and good to go. If we do a ps-aux, and let's put in a pipe, and we'll just grep for camera. You can see the instance of the camera, it gives you the device, all of the settings that were in that configuration file that we showed before, what type it is, all that good stuff, so you can see the camera is up and running. Just some breadcrumbs for you to see how this is going to work and what you need to look for if you have to troubleshoot something. And one of the coolest parts about this new camera streamer is that there's a web page you can go to look at the settings of the camera. You don't have to get in PuTTY and fool around with anything. So if we just open a new tab and we head to the IP of our Pi, 192.168.1.183 for me, and we do a /webcam/control and just hit enter. It's going to take you to a page where you can see all the settings. You can get a still, you can start the MJPEG streamer if you want. There's just all kinds of different things you can do in here right from the browser. So if you'd like to adjust things, check this out first so you don't have to get an SSH. A pretty cool add-on. I really like this. And also, if you do want to change up that configuration file, you need to adjust resolution, you need to do whatever it is you might need to do for your specific camera, all those options are in the documentation that you can use inside that config file, as well as what things mean in that web URL. They're all listed down here. So the information is there if you need it. So the standard Octoprint install, just like this one, is pretty much what everybody's going to utilize, but hopefully I've given you just a little bit more where you can control that camera now much easier with this new camera streamer versus the old MJPEG streamer. MJPEG streamer has been around a long time. It's relatively heavy compared to the new camera streamer, so this should be a much more efficient way to go. But why does all of that make a difference? Well, remember at the top of the video when I told you the difference between OctoPi and Octoprint. Octoprint is just utilizing the streamer that was installed by the OctoPi image. You could use any type of streamer software that you wanted, hence MJPEG streamer, camera streamer now, or even Ustreamer. And if you use a script like from Paul Paxtelis to install multiple images of Octoprint, he's going to use something different with that OS than you might get in the OctoPi image, like MPEG streamer or Ustreamer. It doesn't matter which one you use, as long as it's compatible with the implementation that Octoprint has. So some are better than others, and they're getting more modern all the time. So that's why we have the new camera stack. It should be much more efficient, and they've made it a lot easier to work with. Now, back to the computer, and we'll continue on with our install. So while we get everything configured, we're going to go ahead and unplug our default camera. That's what we're going to call it, because that's what it calls the config file. We'll plug it back in when we're getting ready to do multiple cameras. It's also worth noting that the new camera streamer that OctoPi is using is out here on GitHub. It's open source. Anybody can use it and see how it's configured. It's right here. It's in the OctoPi documentation, Octoprint documentation. It's all out here. You can use it for any of your projects. One of the main benefits with this new camera streamer is it supports a lot of the newer cameras, including the Raspberry Pi Camera 3 and some of those Arduino style cameras that the old stacks did not. So if you have one of those newer Raspberry Pi cams and you weren't able to use it, this will probably get you up and running. So back to PuTTY, we're going to configure our multiple cameras. Remember again, we have our config files here in ls boot camera streamer. We still got the default config. Now, Gina recommends that you remove the default config and then create your own. And there's a reason for that, the biggest one being so you can keep track of which camera is which. And now there are built-in scripts to help you do all these functions. We don't have to go around and delete files and change configurations anymore. So to remove that default cam, all you have to do is sudo, to get root access, remove -USB -camera space default. If we do ls again, you'll see that default configuration is gone and it has stopped that camera stream. So that has cleaned it up. We no longer have a configuration on port 8080. Now, what if we want to add a camera? So the easiest way to do this is to use the script they provided to get this done. But let's go ahead and plug in our first camera. We'll point it at our purple dice. This is the same one we were using as default before. We'll just plug that in. Then we'll run the script. Sudo add -USB -camera. And then you can provide a name. We'll call it purple. Now I'm going to do this way to show you something and then show you a different way here in a moment. But let's go ahead and hit enter. So you can see that it's listed our camera device. It's even calling it out because it knows what it is. It's a C920. It's got a serial number. That's the one you want. So from here, if you just hit 1, hit enter, that's going to select the camera. That's pointed at purple right now because it's the only one plugged in. And it's going to set it to port 8081. It's always going to reserve port 8080 as the default camera, no matter if you deleted it or not. So if this is the one that you would like to show up in the web browser, you would have to change the config file or provide another port when you did this add. So let's Control-C for now. We won't add it. So remember that port 8080 is the only one that's going to show in that browser tab like we're used to. So if you want this one to be 8080, you can pass it parameters with the command. So we'll just do it again. Sudo add -USB -camera. And then we'll name it purple, just like we did before. And then you can pass those options on the command line right here. The next one, we'll just do 8080, because that's the port we want to use. And we'll hit enter. But you'll notice it says it's already in use by another camera. And if we take a look at that /boot/camera streamer directory again, remember we saw this live camera. The live camera configuration is what supports things like Raspberry Pi cams on that ribbon cable port. And they're both in here by default, so that if you have them when you boot up Raspberry Pi or when you boot up Octoprint for the first time, it can pick and choose which one it's going to be able to use based on the port, and it's always going to be on 8080 so that you can see it in the browser window. That's just how it works. If you'd like to force it to use 8080, you can always change up the options for the Raspberry Pi cam as well. So if we do sudo nano for the text editor, /boot/camera streamer into that directory, and just edit live cam, you can see it's on port 8080. So let's just make this one port 8082 for now. I'm not going to do Raspberry Pi today, but it's going to work exactly the same. You just need to make the configuration options different in this live cam. You should only have one port, so you should only be able to be concerned about this one Raspberry Pi. So only one Pi cam. But we'll just Control X, Y, enter to save that. Now 8080 should be clear to use. So one last time, we'll bring up that sudo add USB camera purple 8080. It's fine with it. You can see it's just got a generic video index here if you don't plug in the camera. So one more time, we'll Control C. Now we're ready to go ahead and plug in that camera. We know we're good to configure it on our default port. It's pointed at our purple dice. And we're finally ready to go ahead and add it. So we'll bring up our command one more time. We're on port 8080, it's called purple. Now it sees the camera that we plugged in. We know it's a C920, there's its serial number. So just hit 1 to select that camera. If there was multiples, there'd be a list. You'll see that in a second. It built it, it spilled out where it put it. We should be good to go. And if you take a look in that boot camera streamer directory one more time with the ls command, there is your purple configuration. And if you need to make updates to the config, you can just do it right in there. You can just do a sudo nano to edit that file. And there's all the options. You can add more if you wish. So there's one camera, and since it's on 8080, we can go back to the browser, and there it is right in our control tab, as we expected it to be. Now that we know all the groundwork and how to configure things, it's really easy just to add multiples. So let's go ahead and plug in our second C920. We'll point it at our orange dice over here. We'll plug it into the Pi. We'll bring up that add cam again, and you shouldn't have to call out the port name. It's just going to pick the next available port. So by default, it should be 8081. But you can if you wish. So let's just call this one orange, and we'll hit enter. You can see it selected 8081. We're good there. We saw before that our purple cam was this AFD serial number. Our new cam is this 89 one. You can compare it with the output we had before up here. So we'll just hit option 1 again, select our new camera. It'll configure everything, build our config file. Our config file's in the folder, and we're good to go. Now the tricky part can be viewing multiple cameras, because remember, we only have one in that control tab. And one thing that you need to remember on this new camera stack is it doesn't listen to all network interfaces by default any longer. So basically, it's not going to listen to all ports. 8080 is fine, 8081 and other ports might not be. So when you set up options for your new cameras, you want to make sure you add a specific one to listen for it. So again, here's our configuration. Purple's working just fine in the tab because it's on 8080. But let's go ahead and update the orange one real quick. So sudo nano /boot/camera streamer USB-orange.conf. Down here in options, we're just going to put in --http-listen equals and then 0.0.0.0. So I'm going to listen on any interface. That should be all you have to add. Control X, Y, enter to save. And now that both cameras are listening on the interfaces, we're just going to do a quick reboot to clean things up. Make sure everything gets started correctly. You could restart these with System Control, but it's probably a good time for a reboot anyway. And when we come back up, our camera tab is good. We're on our purple camera, and we should be able to access both the cameras via a URL just like we could before on the old camera stack, now that we have it set up correctly. So let's just duplicate this tab real quick. And this camera is in HA proxy. We're not going to go through all those steps. That's a little confusing. You should be able to access it and use it just like this. But we'll go to the IP/webcam/ action equals stream. And there's our purple cam. So let's duplicate this one. And since it's not in proxy, it's not going to be called the same thing. We're just going to take the webcam off. Right after the IP, we're going to do :8081. So the port we assigned for the orange cam. And now that it's listening to all the interfaces, you can just do / action equals stream. There is our orange camera. So now we know we can get to both cameras if we need them via a URL. And I still think, for me, the handiest way to access multiple cameras is by using the multicam plugin. There are several plugins out there now, especially with the new stack. They do different things, but I'm familiar with multicam. You can use whichever one you want, but I'm just going to go to Settings, Plugin Manager, Get More, and then I'm just going to search for multicam. We'll just install it. All this plugin does is give you a couple of buttons that you can update to get to different cameras. Now that the multicam plugin is installed, we've rebooted, we can go back to Settings. We'll scroll down to Multicam, and we can name our cameras and set them up how we wish. So we've got purple here. This is on our default URL. We can just copy it from the bar up here to get us started. But http:/your IP, and we'll just backtrack here. The default one, as you saw before, is webcam / action equals stream. There's the stream. And then for your snapshot, for things like time lapse, it's always going to be at that 127.0.0.1 address. If you want to grab that URL, the easiest thing to do is just to head to Classic Webcams here. And this is your snapshot stream. So we'll just copy that, take it back to Multicam, and paste it right here. So our first camera stream is good. Now we'll just hit plus to add another one. We want it to be our orange cam. We'll copy in our URL. Remember, it is a bit different. After the IP, we're going to add our port 8081. We'll take off the webcam portion. There's our stream. And then the snapshot stream, we'll just copy it down. All you have to do on that one is update the port. We're on 8080, the new one's on 8081. And we can save. You'll have to restart after that plugin gets updated. And now with that enabled, we have our options up here. We've got our purple cam. That's the default one. And then you can select your orange cam to flip back and forth in between all the cameras that you've added. So now you're using multiple cameras with the new camera stack. It's going to be much more efficient, and it's just easier to use all in all. One last thing to note, if you go to Settings and you go into Webcam and Time Lapse, now you have options to select which camera is going to take the snapshots for the time lapse. You can select any of the ones that we've configured by their name. Classic webcam is going to be the standard default webcam that you see in the tab. but you can pick and choose which one will take those snapshots. You can always test it with the URL. You can see it actually updates there on the fly. So kind of a handy feature built in, so you don't have to mess around with which one actually points at the webcam. You can just select it right here in the menu. So there you go. There's a quick primer to get you up and running the new OctoPi with the new camera stack. This is only going to be helpful if you have some sort of multi-camera configuration you need to do on the new stack versus the old one. The new camera streamer is going to be much more efficient than the old MJPEG one. Now, I'm still using the old school plugin for multicam. There's a lot of other great options out there, so check that out. Also, with this new streamer, you can utilize the new Raspberry Pi cams. And you can do it pretty much the same way as I did here with the USB cams. You just have to use that live cam configuration file. And remember, you only have one port. Unless you have some sort of breakout or something like that, you're only going to be able to use one Pi cam at a time. As always, thanks to everybody that works on Octoprint. It's awesome software, as well as everyone that works on that OctoPi image to make it easier to use. Definitely consider supporting the project. Hopefully you found this helpful. That is it for today, and I'll see you really soon on the next one.